It's time to talk Gonzaga basketball.
Get ready.
Zag insiders Jim Meehan and John Blanchette step away from the paper and up to the microphone to give you the biggest storylines. It's the Spokesman-Review Zags Insiders Podcast.
Here we go.
Good Monday morning. Welcome back to the Zags Insiders Podcast. Welcome back to the inland northwest version of Siberia out there. We got the snow back. We got the wind blowing. Conditions in gymnasiums are not bad, though, for Gonzaga. Always controlled temperatures, environment, and they seem to thrive whether the weather is good or bad outside. They always thrive inside in those arenas. Welcome back. As I said, we've got John Blanchette, columnist with the Spokesman-Review. We've got Richard Fox, analyst on Gonzaga TV broadcasts locally and regionally. I'm Jim Meehan, beat writer for the Spokesman-Review, cover Gonzaga. Polls came out this morning. No surprise. I think it's been trending this way. Gonzaga unanimous at number 1. Number 2, Tommy Lloyd, Arizona. And that's kind of the same ranking you'll see in the net rankings and the same ranking in the overall seeds with Gonzaga at 1 and Arizona at 2 by most of the bracketologists. Foxy, that game's got to happen at some point, doesn't it?
Yeah, I would imagine that Mark and Tommy probably want it to happen less than anybody else, though. But I certainly would love to see it. Just it's kind of hard to imagine, but just what would that be like if they ran into each other in the Final Four? But look, I mean, I've seen, obviously, the three of us are intimately, familiar with Gonzaga, but I've gone out of my way to watch Arizona play quite a bit this year, and I think they're where they need to be. They're that good, and you see a lot of the similarities to what Gonzaga does as far as the offensive end of the floor. But the team he has actually reminds me of that team with Karnowski and Collins and Williams up front. He plays Ballo and Koloko up front. I mean, that is just a tough ask for anybody in the country. And then they've got a ton of guards, including their lead guard, Mathurin, who's a pro. So they're good. But yeah, I think Zag Nation's head's going to explode if we run into them in the tournament.
Yeah, I think the score would be like 95-91. I don't know who wins, but they're going to get up and down the floor. That'd be a very entertaining game. Well, let's go back through the week that was. Gonzaga, another 2-0 week. Maybe not quite as easy as it would have been, as we would have thought going into the week at Pepperdine. Team they beat 117-83 the first time around. A lot more of a battle this time. Same thing with Santa Clara at home on senior night. That game turned into be a pretty good battle throughout the second half. John, Pepperdine, Andrew Nemhard, 14 assists. I think Timmy had 19. I think Chet had 18 points, 17 rebounds, something like that. But the Waves made it a lot more interesting this time around, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. And I think that you saw it throughout the weekend. It's so easy to get spoiled when you expect so much of this team. And it's easy to dismiss the obvious. It's a long season. And you're getting teams the second time around now. Pepperdine was better prepared this time than they were the first time. And, even if those first games against these opponents are blowouts, there's always going to be a situation where a player on the other team had some success in a situation, and that success is going to give them some confidence that, hey, I can build that onto more success. The teams are better, the Zags are better scouted, the opponents are better prepared, and for Gonzaga, there's that mental side of, I know they don't look past guys, but hey, maybe we clubbed them once. It's just hard to bring it every single night. And in addition to the teams, the opponents playing better, we've seen a little bit of slippage. Maybe not slippage, just maybe a lack of sharpness. The shooting's down a skosh over the last 3-4 games. The 3-point shooting's down a little more. on defense, they're not creating quite as many turnovers as they were before. Maybe not getting as many easy transition opportunities as opposed to the opportunities they make out of their normal pace. It's not sky is falling stuff. We see it virtually every year at about the same time. There are more important games ahead, let's face it, and not just this weekend's road series, but the postseason. And it's not that the Zags are looking back past anybody, but let's face it, it's a long season, and I think maybe you saw a little bit of drag there in both games this week.
Well, Richard, I know you were on the call for Gonzaga and Santa Clara Saturday night at the Kennel. Senior night, a lot going on beyond just the game, but Gonzaga really handled Santa Clara down there last month. I think it was 115-83, otherwise known as the Drew Timmy layup line. I think he had 32 points, maybe missed 4 shots. Totally different this time around. Drew had a lot of attention coming his way. I think he scored 23 still, but they were very hard earned. It was 60-41 the first time they played down in Santa Clara at halftime. This time it's 59-53 midway through the second half, and the Zags had to work. The Broncos had a lot more fight. The Zags had a lot more missed shots. What else did you see out there Saturday night, Richard?
Yeah, well, I mean, just from the jump, it's different, right? Your starting lineup's not exactly whole, trying to get through some of those festivities. And I thought that helped Santa Clara a bit, get their legs under them in a way that maybe they may not have been able to do under normal circumstances. But I got to tell you, I was super impressed with Santa Clara. It was my first time seeing them in person. They are big. And, we've talked about on this podcast how typically, or at least historically, the BYU, who's had some of those bodies, those athletes that have been able to play with Gonzaga, particularly up front. I mean, Santa Clara's got real size. And then when you couple that with Jalen Williams, all of 6'6", 6'7", and a very good player, and then the rest of the guys around him with Pipes, who had maybe a career night. Justice didn't play all that well, but he's been a guy all year who's been pretty consistent from the 3-point line. They're a good team, and they're also that was the moment for them. I thought they came out very well organized with a clear plan, and they played incredibly hard. If they win that game, they may not be solidly off the bubble, but they're certainly in the mix in a way that they weren't going into the game. And I thought you saw a team that played that way. And there's so much that goes into senior nights. It's not just the seniors that are nervous either. And this is a really weird year because it's not just guys like Nembhard and Bolton that you may expect to leave, just given the fact that they are technically seniors. But, this is Holmgren's last game, certainly. What is it for Timmy? You've got some young guards on that team who may elect to see what the NBA thinks of them. But so it's not just those upperclassmen that are maybe having some of those jitters, but it kind of trickles down. So I thought Santa Clara played really, really well. Quite frankly, they looked like a tournament team, at least on Saturday night. I know they've got some consistency issues. I thought it was a great test for Gonzaga, and just given the circumstances, I thought they ended up playing a good game. And the last thing I would say is, we talked about this too. You need those games with that tightness, and I think Gonzaga will benefit from that game, and they'll certainly benefit from what they're going to see this weekend.
Yeah, they weren't down to the wire, last second possession type games, but they were a serious test deep into the second half, both games. And Gonzaga performed pretty well in both games when they needed to and pulled away. We mentioned senior night. Senior night is always an interesting night for players, families, coaches, fans, the whole works. And that was the case again Saturday night. Hit very close to home for Mark Few. And I didn't realize this, his son is a senior manager. I knew he was a manager, and that made me feel about 80 years old all of a sudden. But then you had the 4 seniors that are listed as seniors on the roster. You have their families, you have the pregame introductions, the postgame speeches, the new starting lineup. Foxy, give us a rundown of your senior night, and then maybe your impressions of what it does to a team trying to, as we said, Santa Clara's pretty good. You got to turn around from all the festivities and get the game face on pretty quick.
Yeah, well, my senior year, we had 5 seniors on that team with Bankhead and Skinner, Stepp, and Violet, and myself. And so that was, there was a lot of emotion going into that game, 5 seniors on the floor with the staff and families. But it was also the last game of the kennel. So there was a lot going on. But our group, we were just so excited to play, the 5 of us to have a chance to start a game together. Really wanted to send out the old kennel in the right way. I think we actually played Santa Clara. I want to say we played Santa Clara, but it doesn't really matter. But we didn't. I don't think we had a very close game. We played pretty well, and it was a ton of fun. And I remember having a ton of fun after the game. Well, maybe not delve into those stories so much, but it was awesome. We just had a lot of fun with that, and that was a really close group of seniors. The whole team, but that senior group, it was just a ton of fun. So. But it's just an abnormal day. You get to a point where you just want the game to start. It feels like the day is moving in slow motion because you know what's at the end of it, and you've got family in town, and you've got some added requests or responsibilities that you just normally wouldn't have. And by the time the game tipped off, we were just ready to play. To be honest with you,
John, you've seen a bunch of senior nights at Gonzaga. Some of them pretty memorable. JP Batista's brother, probably the one that sticks in my mind. Even when I wasn't even covering the team then, and I remember that scene pretty well. And it's kind of one of those. I think Mark Few has a real love-hate relationship with it. He loves seeing all the families, I'm sure, and all the the guys having their moment in the spotlight. But the coaching side of his brain is always thinking tip off, that team does this and that, and are we ready, and how's our emotional state going into it? What do you recall about past senior nights? What did you see on Saturday against Santa Clara?
Well, I appreciate Mark's dilemma, and like any coach, he wants to compartmentalize. He wants to be able to take one problem and put it in this corner, and on senior night you can't do that. It's all this melting pot, and it's the hardest night of all. Foxy mentioning his senior night and the last game in the kennel, to me that maybe was the most memorable for me, simply because I got a chance to visit with a lot of guys that I'd covered before in my days going back to the early 80s as a beat writer, and guys that I saw play in the 60s and 70s when I was in Montana who came through. And in fact, Santa Clara was the opponent, and one of the players on that team, his dad was an ex-Zag, John Doherty, who played in the kennel. So that was fun. I also remember, Mark trying to mitigate all the problems of senior night there was a glitch in the schedule that allowed them to have a game after the regular season, or there was enough of a gap that he thought he could schedule a non-conference opponent in there. So he'd bring in Longwood. I always called those the Roney Turiaf games, because Roney was such an emotional churn for his senior night that I think, they brought in somebody, Longwood, I believe it was, or somebody like that, or Cal Bakersfield. I can't remember.
I covered a Bakersfield senior night. Yeah. And,
just basically, so if Roney did have emotional meltdown, that they could survive it and not have it count in the conference standings. Not, if in those days the league might come down to a game or two. So those were fun in its own way. And I do remember the Roney one because he made Brian Michelson such a part of it. Brian didn't get a lot of minutes his senior year as a walk-on, but he and Roney were tight. And Brian got a lot of playing time that night, I think, and Roney made him a big part of it, and that was a lot of fun. The problem with senior night is that, as Foxy pointed out, half the team now never gets one. You've got the Holmgrens and the Suggses, players of that ilk who will never become seniors, and whether it's one and done or two and done or even three and done. But what are you going to do? Schedule it the first game of the season? You got to have it. It's one of those things you got to have. It's great for everybody to go through it. And, you just hope that you don't have, the times when you stumbled against a BYU, like happened a few years ago.
And that's probably why we saw Jalen Suggs the last 2 weeks of games, getting his night in front of the fans indirectly, not playing, but enjoying the atmosphere. As we mentioned, senior night with guards Andrew Nemhard, Rasheer Bolton, and Matt Lang and Will Graves as well. I think the question on everybody's minds was what's going to happen with Nemhard and Bolton. They do have the option of a COVID year, an extra year. Both of them, I asked last week, if they were moving on, do they know what they're doing, their plans? Neither were committal on that, which surprised me a little bit. Not to raise the hopes of fans that the starting backcourt will be back intact, but at least the door is somewhat cracked to returning. I would be very surprised if Nemhard came back. He's done just about everything you can in college basketball other than hoist a title, and he might correct that or might add that here in a month or so. But he reminds me so much of Nigel Williams-Goss. He just is the ultimate floor general, always tries to make the right play and usually does. He can score it. His shot isn't, something out of a postcard, but he knocks them down. He distributes. He's a great passer. He rebounds. He can guard. I'm not sure he can really add to his stock if he came back. Maybe he can. Bolton, I'm not as sure, but again, he's got some pro aspirations too. Richard, what's your sense of these two leaving that door open? I guess just to keep options open at the very least. But any real chance you see either of them coming back?
I mean, I would be surprised as well. I mean, you do get to a certain point in your career where you're ready to do something different. As awesome as it is to be at GU and to play in these games and everything that goes around or comes with it, you do get to a point where you just want to do something different. I mean, I think it's a pretty natural, evolution as a person. Is, I've been in college basketball for 5 years in some cases. I want to go do something different. I want to see if I can play in the league, or even if it's not an NBA, can I have a good experience in Europe? And for the folks that aren't familiar, I mean, playing in a high-level European game is awfully fun and just different than college, and it's a higher level. And at some point, you want to see if you can do that. So, I think it's more than anything, it might come down to that for those guys. Is, do I want to do the GU thing or college thing another year? Do I want to be a student again for another year? Do I want to kind of go through the grind that is college basketball? Or do I want to, walk away or move on from being a student and try a different grind? So my guess is those guys will be gone. I mean, they're just so mature for their age. You can see that in the way they play. But if you know them at all personally, it's pretty easy to see how they would transition fairly easily to the next level, wherever that might be. So, and then, we talked about this during our broadcast on Saturday night. It's just it's the new college basketball. You have no idea. And they have so much time now to make these decisions. They can get in, you can get into early summer before a guy is obligated or mandated by the rules to actually make a firm choice one way or the other. And I suspect the staff's not going to know who's coming back from this roster until we get to June. And as important as Nemhard and Bolton are, there's a few other guys on this roster that maybe keep them up at night wondering what their choice is going to be.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm Nemhard, well, I would expect he has a great shot to make a roster, whether he's drafted or not. If you're an NBA GM, I mean, he's a great second round pick. He's got size. I think he can run and organize offenses with how he works off of ball screens. I think he has a very good shot of making an NBA roster. Now, John, how do you weigh in on I know we're guessing here, but how do you weigh in on the chances Nemhard or Bolton return?
I just don't see it. I don't see him coming back. Foxy's point about, the great experience of Gonzaga notwithstanding, they're going to be pragmatic in how they look at things. Do they do themselves any good in terms of development and career coming back? I just don't see. I mean, I think other than like you say, Andrew, what else can he do to show himself and his worthiness for an NBA roster? And I think Rasheer's has had a terrific time playing on a championship level team after having a tough experience at Iowa State. He's been able to show pro people what he can do in a complementary role. And whether that's pro people overseas or pro people in the NBA, I just don't see an upside for them other than the Gonzaga experience. And like Richard says, sometimes you're at the end of that experience, maybe even more so these days, because, these guys played through a tough year of college basketball a year ago with the COVID situation. It wasn't the same. There was a tension to it and a drag to it that there wasn't in college basketball before. This season's obviously been much better that way, but yeah, it's probably time for them to be done. And I think, you're probably going to say there's going to be an issue with Drew Timme as well. That's the one that's probably going to be the most crucial for next year's team, this year's team. We kind of know that Chet Holmgren's moving on, but there's still no definitive take on Drew. And there again, I don't know what more he does to prove himself. What I think the situation maybe you have with Drew is the NIL situation, and can there be enough for him still at this level doing that makes a pro decision a little stickier? I don't know.
Well, as we talked about, Chet Holmgren is projected 1, 2, or 3 in almost every mock I see. He's been coming on in the second half of the season, certainly not hurting his draft position. Very hard to see any scenario where he comes back. Kind of following the Jalen Suggs model, his former teammate back in Minnesota, and as a one and done. And that makes enormous sense with the amount of money he can make and launch his career as a 20-year-old. That's a lot of earning power for a lot of years. Drew Timme you're right, it's a little more of a complicated situation. Just a terrific college basketball player, as good a low post scorer as I've seen in a long time in college basketball. Maybe Garza was in that realm before that. I mean, Gonzaga's had a bunch of great bigs over the years, but not sure anyone scored it quite as efficiently and as often as Drew does on the low block. I know Kyle Wiltshire and Sabonis obviously put up huge numbers, Rui, Brandon Clark. So tribute to what he's gotten done. Always the question is, how does his game translate into the NBA, where, they want 6'11", 7-footers shooting threes and spacing the floor, guarding guards on switches and being mobile enough to do those kind of things, run the floor. Those probably aren't Drew's specialties, but when you can score it the way he does, there's got to be interest as well. Richard, and the NIL, John, you're right. The NIL is a big consideration here because Drew has turned into be a pretty good actor. We see that on the commercials. And he's got, I think, at least 3 or 4 NIL deals going, so he's probably doing just fine that way. Richard, what's your take on Drew, his decision, and those factors that could keep him here or send him on his way?
Yeah, well, I think the NIL thing is real. I think that's going to, if I had to, we'll probably never know what the numbers are, but if I had to put money on it, I'd say he probably could make more money coming back next year via the NIL than he could playing anywhere else, including, in the NBA. But, if I was sitting down with them and I had a horse in the race, I think my comment to him would be, you have a chance to be like an all-time guy. Not, you're already kind of there for GU, but, you have to think he's going to be an All-American this year. Maybe he's second, third team, he and Chet are going to be, I would think, on a lot of those lists. At that point, you're a 2-time All-American, the numbers he's putting up, go be that Tyler Hansbrough type of guy. Yeah. Just a legend in the college game. I mean, and that's a priceless thing to accomplish, and he's good enough to do that. Whether or not that sales pitch would have enough sway over Drew. I don't know. It's certainly not. It's a great position to be in, but often those great positions are also really difficult. And with the turnover you see on GU's roster now in a way that we certainly didn't have with 5 seniors at senior night. It's not. There's a lot of turnover with the guys he plays with every year. It's like a whole new start every year. How does that weigh on him? Do I really want to go through that process again and build new relationships with guys when I've seen a lot of my buddies leave and go try to do something different? So, but if he comes back, I mean, we're talking about a guy when it's all said and done that will end up being one of the great college basketball players when you look at his numbers and what he will have accomplished. And when you have the perspective the three of us do, you know how awesome that would be and what a unique life experience that would be. But when you're 22 or 21 and having to make that decision, sometimes you don't look at it quite that way. So, but it's going to make all the difference. I'm sure we're not ready to think about next year, but the prognosis or the outlook for next year's team changes a whole lot depending on whether or not he decides to come back or not.
Yeah, that is the name that keeps popping in my head is Tyler Hansbrough. I think stayed all 4 years, just almost legendary status at his school and in college basketball. I will say one thing. I'm not sure I've seen many guys enjoy college basketball, the school, the experience more than Drew Timme. And he loves it. And he enjoys every minute on the floor. You can see it. He sat down to the post-game presser the other night, and he's looking at the stat sheet, and Nembhard's sitting next to him. He says, I almost got a triple-double. And Nembhard's like, what? He goes, yeah, 23. He had 23 points. He goes, 9 rebounds, 9 fouls drawn. So he just has he's always an entertainer. That kid's always entertaining. So, John, what's up? You're Drew Timme. What are you doing?
Ooh. Well, I'm talking to my family and my counselors, and I'm putting out all the feelers to find out, just what's out there. I don't know. I mean, I think I'm probably going. He has enjoyed college basketball, and he will enjoy it again. But Richard's point about having to remake this team every year is a significant one. How much does he want to have to break in a new lineup and go through all that again? All the attention that he receives defensively, that's going to get nothing but worse or more intense. Let's put it that way. There's a lot of things that way to weigh, and I think Drew is a guy who says, hey, let's try the next thing. Let's see what's out there. What big bite of life can I take? And whether it's playing in the NBA or overseas or wherever, I think he's probably ready to do that. And yet I know he'll miss what he has at Gonzaga. But again, like I think I mentioned before, the NIL situation becomes very significant here. If he's not going to take a huge financial hit by staying, maybe those legacy issues and becoming one of the all-timers at Gonzaga and in college basketball persuades him. It'll be a very interesting decision.
And I would say this too. His game, I don't think staying hurts his stock.
No.
I think that's kind of baked at the next level. The NBA is, he is what he is, and he's going to keep improving that jump shot. But, nothing this year has indicated that he's a stretch 4 or 5 at that level, right? Coming back, he's not going to all of a sudden drop, out of the first round or, out of the draft entirely. You can always go, but you can never come back. And that's just what makes the decision so hard. To your point, John, about, I think he is a guy who wants to do new things, and he's not afraid. He's got so much confidence. And he reminds me a lot of Jeremy Pargo in that way. Jeremy had this unconditional belief every night that he was the best player on the floor. And I did the radio all those years. There were plenty of games he was not the best player on the floor. I'm thinking the guy's like, Derrick Rose and those types of guys. But he always believed it to his core. I think Drew has that kind of swagger, that confidence. So I don't think he's going to make a decision based on. Right, I guess I wonder if he'll make a decision based on where I am, where my draft stock is, because I don't think he's going to care. I think he's going to look at it like, I'm good enough to play at that level. I'm going to figure it out. But once you go, you can't come back. And as much of a grind as college can be, and it really, it's an awesome experience and all that, but there are things about it that are hard and sometimes get old. There's no, my dad told me a long time ago, there's no place like campus land. There's no place like college basketball. It's a very cool experience. Everybody will be waiting for a long time. I hope he makes a decision sooner rather than later, and it doesn't drag out till May and June, for his own sake, but also obviously for everybody who's affiliated with GU.
Well, we'll see what happens. I noticed, I don't believe his parents were at the game the other night, so I think as a sports writer, I'm obligated to jump to the conclusion, well, they would have been there if it was his last home game. Take that with a grain of salt, please. Well, let's skip ahead. We've got the closing week of the regular season coming, and the Zags are closing it with probably their two toughest matchups of the year. And I admit I'm wrong even mentioning that, because I said the same when they went to BYU. And that turned into an easy game for Gonzaga. This one I don't think is going to be easy, the first or the second. San Francisco on Thursday, St. Mary's on Saturday. The Gales back in the poll, number 23. So that'll be a ranked versus ranked matchup again. I think the Zags are 7-0 in that regard against St. Mary's when both teams are ranked. But first up is San Francisco. Todd Golden's team still plugging away, still getting wins, still in the field on most of the brackets. I wouldn't say they're safe or home free. They need to finish with some strength here, either in this game against Gonzaga or in the tournament. But the Dons are a formidable foe with that backcourt, Bouye and Shabazz. The big kid Masalski gave Drew some issues inside. And that building will be packed and ready to go. And the Dons usually turn it up in there and battle GU pretty well. John, how does Thursday's game line up after what you saw up here at the Kennel?
Well, it wasn't as tough a game up here in the Kennel as I thought it would be in terms of the final score, but like you say, Masalski is a tough. His strides at San Francisco from what he was at San Diego are significant, and he gave Drew some real problems. He's a big, strong, sturdy guy, rebounds it well. That makes him a tougher matchup. And of course, those guards, if they get rolling, and one of them is bound to get rolling, if not both of them. The Zags have done a pretty good job of kind of neutralizing one, if not both. But they're just tough to chase around, and so and the thing about this game for Gonzaga is San Francisco wins. I think they're in the tournament. I think win over Gonzaga gets them in, and so there's a huge stake there for the Dons, and I think they'll be emotionally ready accordingly. I think it's a tough way for Gonzaga to end the season on this trip, simply because they're back-to-back games against quality, but not just quality opponents, exceptional opponents in this league, and again they don't have the same things to play for that these other teams do, or at least certainly what San Francisco has to play for on Thursday night. So they've got to be careful, and but they also got to play with some abandon too, and not with the conference sewn up, a chance to finish the conference season undefeated, what have you. There's some things still to play for, but watch out, because both of these teams, especially San Francisco, are coming hunting.
Well, and Gonzaga is projected as the number one overall seed. When you're the number one overall seed, you get to pick your region and kind of your path to trying to make a Final Four. Portland is obviously Gonzaga's preferred roadmap there. But a slip up here or there, and Arizona maybe becomes the number one seed in the West and takes that path instead of Gonzaga. So a lot to play for. And interestingly enough, Saturday night will be senior night for the Gales.
As Thursday will be for San Francisco.
Yeah, that's so Mark Few can kind of sit there and go, yeah, you guys deal with it this week. But both those teams, they're veteran teams anyway. Their starting lineup might change, but they've got a lot of experienced returning guys. Masalski, I think, is a senior as well. Richard, up here, the Zags dominated St. Mary's for most of the game, but the Gales did kind of do what they do. They slowed it to a crawl. They guarded pretty well, make you shoot over them, and they made it an interesting second half. Zags end up winning that game by double figures, but not a cakewalk by any means, and it never is down in Moraga, or rarely is, I should say. What's the expectation Saturday night when the Zags and Gales hook it up again?
Well, I mean, we talked about it after the game, the pod after that game. I think flying home, St. Mary's felt pretty good. I would have felt pretty good that our game plan works if we can find a way to make shots a little bit more consistently. They just shot it so poorly in the first half that, when they get down, it's very difficult because even when they need to play fast, they're not able to do it. I think it's just drilled into them so much that we're going to control the pace and we're going to take care of the ball, look to score deep in the shot clock, that when they're down, it's really hard, if not impossible, for them to speed it up. And you saw that even late in the game when they got it close, maybe 5 minutes left and they needed to maybe try to speed it up a touch. They just couldn't do it. I would expect them to shoot the ball better at their place. And with all the emotion of senior night, and to the point John had earlier, for both these clubs, if they can win, they're in. I think right now St. Mary's is solidly in. If they can beat San Diego on Thursday, I suspect that they're in, so long as they don't have a bad loss, to say, in the tournament, WCC tournament, that is. San Francisco has more work to do, and a win is going to firmly put them in the tournament. And both those teams are going to play better at their place. That's just the way it works. They're going to shoot it better, be more comfortable, have their fans behind them. And to John's point earlier, I don't think you could have drawn it up any better for GU in a way. I mean, I suspect Mark is looking at this and telling his guys, we're on the road, but let's treat this like we would a weekend at an NCAA tournament. We've got an opportunity to play two NCAA tournament caliber teams. Let's get a feel for where we are. Let's go into this like we would if we were going into the second weekend of the tournament or even the first weekend of the tournament. So I'd expect GU to be all business, despite the fact they've locked up the league, despite the fact they're sitting with, even with the loss, I would imagine they're going to be a 1 seed, certainly a 2 seed. They're going to be happy with where they are. I think you're going to see a GU team that's all business and ready to play. I can't wait, to be honest with you. I mean, these are the games that Gonzaga doesn't get to play all that often in league. And here they have 2 of them that they get to play in 1 week. That's a pretty good opportunity.
No, I think the points there are right, that San Francisco is going to have some confidence. It was a 3-point game in the first half up here, played, right with Gonzaga. And St. Mary's, for long stretches, that game did the same. They were down on the scoreboard, but they were battling on fairly even terms. So both teams will have some confidence, and they'll have the home crowds, something the Zags are going to have to deal with. Well, that's going to do it for this week's podcast, the Zags Basketball Insider Podcast. Thanks to Richard Fox, to John Blanchette, producer, engineer, cameraman extraordinaire, Jesse Tinsley. I'm proud of myself for not mentioning the Rams Super Bowl win one time. Oh, wait, I just blew it, John. Sorry about that. Anyway, thanks for joining us, and we'll be back next Monday with another edition of the Zags Insiders Basketball Podcast.